Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Sugar and Strength podcast. I am your host, Kayla Girgen, and I just want to say, for those of you that are watching on YouTube, I want to set the expectation that I really want to lead into this podcast, meaning that when I feel inspired, I don't want to go put makeup on and dry shampoo all the time. So I can't promise what you might see on this end if you happen to be watching on YouTube. So I just want to set that expectation. I might look like a hot mess sometimes on here, but that means that maybe I'm wildly inspired about something and I can't wait to share that with you. I will also add that if you listen to episode 1, I want to thank you for hanging on thus far and for future episodes as well. So this podcast and finally getting it started, I had to face a lot of things in terms of, just not putting things off any longer. And I think when it comes to things like public speaking, for example, I know that I trip up on my words a lot. So if there's anything that needs clarifying, please don't hesitate to ask. I know I screw up sometimes. I can only edit so much, but I know sometimes my excitement gets the best of me and then I'm even more tongue twisted. So I can't always promise what I'm going to look like, what I'm going to say, but I hope that you're able to get my messages. And I'm excited for today's conversation. This is my first AMA or Ask Me Anything, and I love this concept. I know I've seen other podcast hosts do it, and this is a great opportunity for you to get your questions answered. So for this first batch, these are all questions that are coming from my Sugar and Strength Academy members. And if you're wondering, it is basically an online community of women. If you like a lot of the topics that we're talking about, I have a lot of spaces dedicated to that. So things like CGM and movement and recipes. I have a whole hub of glucose or blood sugar friendly recipes. We do challenges. So we've done summer challenges. We've done winter challenges. We've done strength training. In the spring or maybe early summer, I'm planning to bring back our 30 plants a week challenge. And that just is more focused on things like fiber and gut health and eating 30 plants a week. So that's probably one of my favorites. We've done step challenges and rucking challenges. So that's one of my favorite things about the community is keeping each other motivated. So that's a great spot to message me as well. So if you want that one-on-one or chat messaging with a dietitian, I would invite you to check out the Sugar and Strength Academy. I will link that below, and we will get right into it. Before we get into it, I have one quote that I want to share with you, and then maybe a couple other little asterisks here before we dive into answering questions. But I'm currently reading Midnight Library, and there was a quote that stuck out, or a sentence, and I wanted to share that with you all because as I read it, I was like, this is what I want to do for people. I want to simplify things. So the sentence that I highlighted this morning was, "To be a human is to continually dumb the world down into an understandable story that keeps things simple." Now, in the world of nutrition and fitness, I know that a lot of information is circulating, and I don't think that information is the problem. It's taking that information and actually putting it into action. So I want to be that human to help continually dumb down the world in an understandable story and keep things simple. So if you have any questions that you want to hash out or get advice from a dietitian or personal trainer, I invite you to submit your questions in the AMA box linked in the show notes below. I also wanted to add, if you're new to me, or maybe you've worked with me for a while, and these are some of the reasons why you picked me as maybe your coach, I wanted to give you a little bit more maybe backstory through the lens of ChatGPT. So I saw a lot of people posting this is the image that ChatGPT came up with, and it's a cute caricature. So I asked ChatGPT, what was my prompt? I asked it to create a character based on everything it knows about me. Lo and behold, it's all text. And as I got reading through it, though, I didn't get my picture, but I got a really interesting description on what ChatGPT thinks about me. So I thought it might be fun to share that with you. Again, if you're new to me, or maybe you might get a good chuckle if you've been working with me and you're like, okay, yeah, that's my coach. But I thought it was funny that ChatGPT gave my character the name Kayla Iron Path because, lo and behold, ChatGPT knows I always like to do things the hard way. But it said that it chose Kayla Ironpath is my character name because friends joke that a name fits because she never takes the easy road. She takes the one that builds strength. So, haha there. My backstory, according to ChatGPT, based on everything it knows about me, is that Kayla Ironpath didn't set out to fix people. She set out to understand them. She followed the rules early on, textbooks, calorie counts, neat nutrition charts, but life didn't behave like the syllabus. Real people were tired, overstimulated, burned out, carrying more than just physical weight. So she learned listening instead of prescribing. She learned that blood sugar affects mood, that stress changes food choices, that movement can save someone's mental health when words and pills fall short. That sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is put on a weighted backpack and walk forward anyway. She's been medicated, she's been numb, she's clawed her way back to feeling again, and now she protects that hard-won clarity fiercely. So there you go. That sums me up. To give you maybe a little bit more insight, my core traits, according to ChatGPT, are calm under pressure. Even when she doesn't feel calm on the inside, I will say this is 100% true. I've done a few like maybe presentations or other things where people are like, oh my gosh, you did that. You were so confident. And I was like, internal freak out that you couldn't see. Other core traits, observant. She notices patterns others miss. No BS, compassionate. So kind, but never coddling. Grounded realist. So minimal supplements, maximal fundamentals. Mentally strong, emotionally honest, and the last bullet is quietly rebellious against diet culture extremes and quick fixes. So I will say that I do have a rebellious nature to me, especially when it comes to some of the things I learned getting my RD as well. Now that I'm in this, I have to share more from you. So strengths can translate complex physiology into, oh, that makes sense. I hold space for people without absorbing their chaos, knows when to push, knows when to pause, and leads without needing the spotlight. And flaws, according to ChatGPT, and it does say flaws, the good kind, carries more responsibility than she should. Yes, eldest child here. Sometimes feels emotionally depleted before she admits it. Also very true. Craves solitude after being the strong one for too long. So I will say that I am a creature who loves solitude. I probably like an unhealthy amount of alone time, but I also am working on that. So that is something that I've really have been working with like internally and externally, is reaching out more and just maybe building some of those relationships. And then lastly, needs movement to stay sane. That is certainly true. At the time of this recording, I am in the thick of it in Minnesota. It has been just very, very cold, and I am feeling very cooped up. Every day I'm just looking at the clock going, we get 2 more minutes of daylight today. And all I can think about is when springtime rolls around the corner and I'm doing yard work and out walking around barefoot in my yard. So yes, I will say that movement keeps me sane, specifically moving outside. And then I also wanted to share a couple of signature beliefs that ChatGPT pointed out. One of them is strength solves more problems than restriction ever will. I love that. I think I might save that for a tagline. And discomfort isn't danger. So I liked that one too, just because I think whether it's physical or emotional discomfort, I know that for some of my most successful clients, they are putting in the work, they are getting very uncomfortable, they are challenging a lot of their norms. And that segues into the last signature belief is you don't need more discipline, you need better systems. So in a lot of cases, I'm also trying to help people simplify and automate. I work with a lot of women who have very perfectionistic tendencies like myself. And I have a lot of women that I work with that also have ADHD. So I know that we have these rats in cages in our brain. We're trying to do 100 tasks at once. So trying to minimize those distractions, get some systems to help automate things. And then I'll wrap up with my superpower and my inner motto. And I will say that this is kind of uncomfortable talking about myself, but I feel like being that ChatGPT spit this out, it's a little bit easier. So my superpower is I help people feel capable again. Not hyped, not shamed, capable. Love that. And inner motto, forward is forward, even when it's slow. So I am definitely saving this ChatGPT prompt. I did at the end of all of this ask for a picture, and it was nothing like everybody's cute pictures. So I didn't get what I wanted, but I got something that was unexpected and something that I can cherish here. So if after reading through some of that, you're like, okay, this is my girl, I've been looking for a coach, I would invite you to apply for either group or one-on-one coaching in the show notes below. I have that application link there, and I will reach out to you there. So shameless plug aside, let's get into the meat of today's episode. And I have so many fantastic questions. And our first one comes from Christy from Indiana. And Christy's comment and question was, I love the discussion lately of obesity being a disease that needs treatment. How has this changed approaches in dietetics? So many of us have thought that we just didn't have enough willpower or weren't trying hard enough to lose weight despite our efforts. And I love this concept too. I think we're starting to really embrace as obesity as a disease, and just to help maybe give another kind of side or parallel example, thinking about like high blood pressure, for example, we are doing dietary measures, we're prescribing things like exercise and medications, and now we're starting to see that shift with something like obesity. It's not just a willpower issue or calories in, calories out. We're getting a better idea, I think, metabolically what's happening, and especially as we're, as I venture into this avenue of blood sugar balance and metabolic health, there are a lot of ways in which that overlaps. And we do have to have a lot of modalities on board sometimes. And with my history working with a lot of women after bariatric surgery, I think that that can be a difficult pill to swallow, no pun intended, when you maybe jump through a lot of hoops to get something like bariatric surgery. Maybe you didn't reach that goal that you want, and now you're onboarding something like a weight loss medication or a GLP-1. And I think that can be a little bit humbling, especially if you thought surgery was going to maybe fix the issue. Or again, maybe on the other hand, you've been doing all of these things and now you're just really white knuckling it, but you feel bad about considering something like a medication. So I do have a future episode plan where I'm going to talk through GLP-1 specifically a little bit further, because this is one of the number one things that I get asked about. But I think that what we're seeing with a lot of these medications and the success that we're seeing in other areas, whether it's addiction or heart health or liver disease, we're seeing obesity as something like a metabolic disease, and how that is impacting dietetics specifically. So if you're not sure what dietetics is, that is essentially the study of dietitians. So think kind of fancy clinical word for nutrition. So me, for example, I have my bachelor's degree in dietetics. And if you're not sure what a dietitian really consists of or entails, compared to maybe someone who calls themselves a certified nutritionist, a dietitian actually has a minimum of a bachelor's degree. And now it's actually required that you have a master's degree to sit for the board exam. So on top of that degree, we have to be, or I should say board certified, where we're passing our boards. We also go through clinical rotations prior to that. So much like a doctor goes through a residency, a dietitian goes through clinical hours or an internship where you're getting thrown into all kinds of rotations. And then you can really see in that case, like, what are the specialty areas or things that I like? What are the things that I don't like? And that's really where I knew I always wanted to work in weight management, but that is where I really got to see that firsthand. I learned really quickly that the hospital was not the place for me, and I wanted to work with people who wanted to come see me at the clinic. And my time at the clinic was probably a whole nother episode. I know I don't love to be bound by protocols, and thinking about just my education as a dietitian, it was a lot of calories in, calories out, or eating low salt for high blood pressure and following a lot of those maybe diet norms. Now, I don't know how much that has changed on a curricular level. I did do some digging just to see like what has changed for dietitians who are now sitting. So thinking about somebody who has gone through the schooling for dietetics, what are the requirements? And I will share some of those with you here. So I did a little digging and went back and looked, and I pulled up what is a dietitian actually getting tested on, or what parts of the exam, what are the percentages. So there's 4 big parts for somebody who's got their dietetics degree. They're sitting down to take their exam to be an RD. About 20% of the test specifications are the principles of dietetics. So food science, nutrition science, research applications, education, technology, communication. That is making up about 20%. 45% is nutrition care for individual groups. So one thing that makes dietitians unique is they are trained in MNT, or medical nutrition therapy. We use nutrition as a mode for treatment, and that's what makes dietitians unique. No other specialty does it. So for example, we're trained on how to manage nutrition for diabetes or liver disease or around pregnancy. It is specialized according to individuals and groups, and that's what makes up the other part. So part 2 is about 45% is the screening, the assessment, the diagnosis, what are the nutrition protocols that we're doing, and then also how do we monitor and evaluate that. So far we've got about 20% going to the foundational things like food science. Almost 50% is dedicated to that individual nutrition care. And then the rest is made up of food service management and also just management of other programs and services. So to give you an idea, about 20% is human resources management and financial management, marketing. And I don't know, this looks like maybe it's a little bit more compared to when I was in school. I think I remember maybe 1 or 2 classes where we talked about HR, for example. Wasn't a big part of the RD curriculum. So just at a glance, this looks a little bit bigger. And then lastly, food service systems makes up about 13%. So that's menu development, procurement, meaning purchasing, distribution, service, equipment. So kind of food service management, because there are a lot of RDs that are working in healthcare. So for example, maybe supervising things or food service at a hospital or a nursing home. There are a lot of RDs, and to be honest, those are the RDs that are working in food service that are usually making a little bit more. Probably because for anybody who's worked in food service, you know that can be a very laborious job. So that's what's necessary for the board certification specifically for dietetics. And why I'm going into this is so you know what dietitians are trained on. Because thinking about Christy's question here, in terms of how has this really changed dietetics. Looking at the test curriculum, I don't know that that's really changed. However, there are extra certifications that you can get through the CDR or Commission on Registration Dietetics. I'm screwing it up right now. The Commission on Dietetic Registration. So CDR, they are the ones who actually credential dietitians, and they actually have an extra obesity certificate that you can get. And when I look at this looks awesome in terms of a lot of the curriculum. So this is not required to be an RD. This is like an extra thing that you can get to add more letters at the end of your name. And when I look at this, so it's an extra training essentially where somebody is doing a combination of online and in-person work. And I know some fellow colleagues who've gone through this. And from what I'm looking at, I think that this has been very much updated. So again, the scope of the question, how is obesity as a disease influencing things like nutrition education? I would say for this obesity certificate in particular, which I have also linked some of that criteria below, I see some amazing things on here. So just to give you an idea, this really digs into the science of obesity. So talking about those obesity-related physiological and metabolic pathways, how fat tissue functions as an endocrine or hormone organ, and there is a ton of different genetic or treatment options, especially getting into now that we have more medication options on hand. But what I love here too is that when I'm looking at the assessment and treatment, and this is for both pediatric and adults, this is looking beyond BMI. So ideally looking at things like body composition, but I will say that I do see BMI kind of sprinkled. Unfortunately, that is just such a big part of our medical system, but I like to think that that is much like A1C for blood sugar, it points us maybe in the right direction, but BMI, we definitely have to do some digging. Same with something like A1C. That can point us in the right direction, but oftentimes we need to do a little bit of digging to see what somebody is made of, whether it's their blood sugar or their body composition. So my long answer to Christy's question of how has identifying obesity as a disease changed dietetics? I don't know, to be honest, how that's really affecting the curriculum for dietitians that are currently training. However, dietitians that do go out and seek that extra certification, I think that there is a ton of excess or extra education in that area. And I will say that dietitians, much like physicians who fall into different specialty areas, dietitians are much like that as well. So you'll see, especially in bigger healthcare systems, where you have a dietitian that is specifically in the endocrinology department, and maybe they look after diabetes, or maybe you're seeing a dietitian for specific GI disorders. So you do tend to see these dietitians stay in their silos. And one of those silos we have is weight management or obesity medicine. What we're seeing some of those, labeled different depending on what medical center you're looking at. So hopefully I've answered your question there and given you a little bit of food for thought on that topic. But I love where your mindset is at. And I will say too that, my perspective in seeing this conversation evolve over the years, I love that we're looking at it as a metabolic mechanism. So what is happening under the hood? And this is one reason why I love bringing CGM into my practice and using it with people, is because instead of looking at calories, like calories in, calories out, we can see with a CGM how those calories are impacting your blood sugar and your metabolic health. And that can affect everything from your appetite to your energy to how you're storing fat, for example. So that can be a very valuable tool, especially if maybe you feel like you're sick of counting calories. That is a whole different tool. On to question number 2. And question number 2 comes from Tara from Washington State. And she asks, what blood tests do you recommend requesting that aren't in a routine blood panel? So what's typically going to come in the lab work with your annual physical, you will get a lipid panel, and that includes your triglycerides and your cholesterol. You'll also get a complete blood count oftentimes, and that's going to give you the red blood cells, white blood cells, hemoglobin, hematocrit. So giving us maybe a really surface level snapshot on what your iron looks like. And then also a comprehensive metabolic panel, and that includes liver and kidney function, electrolytes, and fasting glucose. So what I often say is that our system on how we're looking at things like prediabetes and diabetes, it's very glucose centric. So it's looking at things like fasting blood sugar or A1C, which I find that sometimes it's included with an annual physical, sometimes it's not. I had to ask for my A1C to be checked on my last one because it wasn't in the lab list, and then I still never got it. So what my A1C is, I couldn't tell you. But anyways, when we're diagnosing things like prediabetes or type 2 diabetes, it's very glucose-centric. We're only looking at blood sugar, but what we really want to see is insulin. So for that reason, I love, love, love seeing a fasting insulin. And this is a test that you can usually get for $15 to $20 if you're paying out of pocket. And what that shows is at baseline, what is your insulin looking like? And when you're wearing something like a CGM, if you go back to the previous episode episode number 2, where I dig further into blood sugar specifically, I talk a lot about insulin, and that's kind of in the background helping blood sugar get into cells. But oftentimes it's not a lack of insulin that's the problem. It's that we have too much insulin and our cells are resistant to it. So getting a fasting insulin checked can really help give us a baseline level for that. So I love seeing fasting insulin. Ideally, that number is going to be less than 10. However, this is my caveat here, that when you're looking at quote unquote normal ranges, that is not always optimal. So, for example, I believe when I was looking at my fasting insulin from my last round of blood work, I want to say it went up almost to 20, maybe. I'll have to double check, but just know that just because you fall into that normal range doesn't always mean it's optimal. So, when I'm looking at fasting insulin, ideally that's under 10. If you're under 6, even better. Another lab that I love to see that gives us more context to your iron status is ferritin. Ferritin, ferritin. And this shows us essentially your iron stores. A lot of times I see where someone gets an iron panel and it shows your serum iron or maybe iron binding capacity. So when I see that TIBC or iron binding capacity is high, that's almost like your body reaching for iron. It needs more, and oftentimes that is because of a low ferritin. And ferritin is another example where normal does not equal optimal. So typically I love to see people over 40 or even 50. Anything less than that, usually we're trying to bump that back up. But I do see that this one varies a lot. I see a lot of people where they're hanging out at a 12, and maybe that is still from their clinic in that normal range. So nobody intervenes on it when, in my case, that would be a really big red flag. Ultimately, ferritin will give you a better status of your iron. It is nice if you are getting something like an iron panel to have that added as well, so you get more context because there is a lot of interplay. And if you are someone who's had bariatric surgery, I find that ferritin is rarely checked for some reason. So unless your clinic really knows what they're doing, you'll probably have to go out of your way to ask for that. And then lastly, I would add vitamin D to the list. This is one thing that I don't know why it's just not standard protocol to check for this, but vitamin D, especially if you're supplementing calcium. If you are taking a calcium supplement and you do not know your vitamin D status, you could be doing more harm than good. And I don't want to fearmonger there, but I think that it's just really important to get that vitamin D status up. And when we look at things like obesity, vitamin D deficiency tends to run with it quite a lot. And I'm in Minnesota. We are covered up for a good portion of the year. I tend to supplement this regardless of whether I'm getting outside because I just don't have enough skin exposed. And I've heard stories from colleagues too, where they have clients who even have a lot of skin exposed and still have low vitamin D. So some people tend to convert a little bit better than others. So vitamin D, hands down, would be something that I would love to see for people. Again, adding that to the list of normal doesn't equal optimal. I love to see people in that 60 to 80 range. And oftentimes I see people, again, hanging out just above, clinical deficiency, but really in my case, they'd probably be deficient. To summarize everything in terms of extra blood tests that I always like to see outside of routine panels, I love seeing fasting insulin, ferritin, and vitamin D. Those would be my top 3. And our last question for today comes from Veronica from Florida. She asks, how does one determine what, if any, vitamins are worth the money, or what formulation of the vitamin to take, for example, is methylated better to look for versus other varieties? And I love this question. I personally tend to be a minimalist when it comes to supplements because I think they are just that. They are meant to supplement your diet. But I think there are some other good reasons to consider a supplement. So for example, thinking back to our previous question about labs, if you have a documented deficiency like vitamin D, I certainly think that implementing something like a supplement, whether it's in the short term to help get those levels back up, or if it's something where you need long-term support, having a supplement to help supplement just that deficiency is totally helpful. Another consideration is if you are at maybe a higher risk life stage or a condition. So think pregnancy, bariatric surgery, digestive disorders where you're maybe just not absorbing your food. It can be really helpful, depending on your medical history, to have something that helps fill in the gap there. And then lastly, another reason, if you have a specific goal like performance, for example, I think it can be helpful to do something like creatine or protein powders. So just to give you a little bit more context or layers to this question, I will maybe add some supplements that I think are worth it and supplements that I don't think are worth it. And that gives me the opportunity to tease a segment. So one segment that I want to incorporate in the podcast is called What's Up? So SUPP, what's up? And I just want to break down and do a deep dive into supplements. So that will be coming soon. Stay tuned. Make sure you subscribe so you get updates. And if there are any supplements that you would like to dive deeper into, let me know. But just to give you some that are maybe on the list and maybe not worth it or worth it, to give you some teasers, some supplements that I think just aren't worth the money, and I get asked about this one probably more than anything, are greens powders. I'm sorry. I'm just personally not a fan. When you're drinking your greens, you are just, it's not the same benefit as eating your greens or your produce and fruits and vegetables. So I will repeat that. I think that drinking your greens is not the same as eating your greens. And a lot of these supplements can be very, very pricey. I will say too that if you're taking a general multivitamin and you're doing something like a greens powder, I feel like that you're probably getting a lot of those micronutrients from your multivitamin. So I would save your money. I don't think that that one's worth it. I will add to the list to run fast if somebody is trying to sell you a GLP-1 activator. Run far, far away, my friend, because this is, I would say, a load of crap. And lack of a better term, I just don't think that they're worth it. I feel like, again, you're probably getting a lot of those micronutrients from something like a multivitamin. I don't even know what's in a GLP-1 activator. I've looked at a few of them and I'm like, what is this? Like vitamin C, or it's just kind of layering on things that we don't need to layer on. And less is more, I think, when it comes to supplements. Or maybe I should rephrase that and say that more is not better. When it comes to supplements, when I'm working with someone, a lot of times we're scaling back and removing some of those layers because a supplement is not going to oftentimes fix the issue. It's, maybe putting a Band-Aid on something. Perhaps it's a placebo effect, but I've had a couple of cases recently where I'm like, whoa, we've got to scale back on supplements. There's just a ton of overlap here. I think you're wasting a lot of money. And I do see that in the space, especially of like what we would consider functional health, like more alternative medicine that maybe contrasts conventional medicine. I do see a lot of times where maybe somebody's naturopath or chiropractor or, holistic provider is prescribing a ton of supplements. And I'm sorry, I'm not on board with it. I think that you could probably put your money on something like a meal prep service, for example, and that's going to maybe get you a little bit more gain in the long term. Now, when it comes to supplements in terms of what is worth it, I will say first and foremost, looking for third-party tested supplements. And oftentimes these will be identified by having a USP or NSF symbol on the package. I will say that there are some scenarios I've found where they don't necessarily have the third-party certification on the label, but if you go to the website, you'll see that. So for example, ProCare is one popular bariatric supplement company. Love them. I will link them below as well if you're looking for some high-quality bariatric supplements, especially their multivitamins. They don't have the label, or I should say the third-party testing on their label, but if you go to their website, they're very transparent and upload all of their lot numbers and have, again, a ton of transparency for very low cost. But in most cases, you will see USP certified right on the outside and front of the label. So that can be helpful just to know that you've got a third party that's actually taken what's in the powder or the capsule or the tablet and compared that to what's on the label. Before I get into what's worth it, I just want to add to fully answer Veronica's questions in terms of methylated, because I do see that circulating a lot more, like methylated vitamins. And what that means is that the methyl version is typically like that active version. So they're already in their active form, meaning that the body doesn't have to convert them as much. And I will say that for some people, this can be helpful, specifically people who have the MTHFR genetic variation. Sometimes they can't metabolize vitamins maybe as good. And I will say that I might be overstepping a little bit on that statement. It's something that I am, not really privy to, I guess, too much. So this is a newer factor or sector, I should say, for me. Again, just because I tend to be more on the minimalist side, I, for one, have recently looked for more of those methyl versions because, I don't know, maybe I'm just a victim of some of the fear mongering going out there. But typically you'll see that when the B vitamin specifically, you'll see like methyl B12, for example, or methyl folate. So you'll see that actually in the ingredients or on the supplement facts label. Also, people who just don't tolerate synthetic folic acid. So when we get folate, so that's a B vitamin, when we get it from food, it is much different than we get it from folic acid or the synthesized version. So folic acid that we synthesize or make in a lab is much more bioavailable compared to what we're getting in food. So it doesn't mean that it's good or bad. I think it really means like, what is your overall diet quality? And, are you filling in the gaps with something like a high quality multivitamin? And then lastly, the methylated versions can be helpful for maybe some post-bariatric patients too, just because maybe you have less capacity, meaning lower stomach volume, just to help supplement some of those nutrients. Maybe you've had a malabsorptive procedure, and that can be helpful as well. So what you're all probably wondering, what supplements are worth it? I mentioned a multivitamin a couple of times. I think that can be a good just kind of insurance policy, I guess, to make sure you're getting more of those micronutrients. I will say that trying to avoid mega doses is important though, because I see a lot of times where, B vitamins or maybe vitamin C, I see super duper high doses, and I don't know that there's always a lot of benefit to that. So again, more isn't always better. So a good multivitamin is, something that I think's worth it. Vitamin D, especially if you've maybe had your levels and gotten tested. Magnesium is another one. A lot of us are kind of running around magnesium deficient, and that is at the top of my list for the What's Up segment. So more coming on that. And then lastly, especially if you have maybe performance goals or trouble hitting your protein goals, I think a good quality whey protein and creatine are certainly worth supplementing. And those are things that I'm using every day. Actually just posted recently in the Sugar and Strength Academy too about creatine, what I'm doing for a daily dose, my recent kind of change of heart on dosing, and where I think the future of that is going. So if you're interested in diving more into supplements, those are some of the conversations that we have during some of the monthly lunch and learns as well. And coming up, just to give you an example for our lunch and learns in the Sugar and Strength Academy, we're going to be diving deeper into strength training. How do you set up your own plan? We're going to talk about GLP-1s in depth as well. And I can't remember what I have else, but those are a couple of big ones. I'm always asking members what they want to hear about. And then once a month, we do a deep dive during a lunch and learn. All in all, I think some big questions to ask yourself when you're considering taking a supplement or starting a new one is, number one, am I consistently doing the big things? Am I eating a balanced diet? Am I exercising regularly? Am I managing my stress and getting quality sleep? Are you doing those big things before we start to work on the smaller things like taking a supplement? Number two, what specific need am I trying to address with this supplement? Am I correcting a deficiency? Am I looking for a performance boost? Is it just convenience? Why are you looking to go after this supplement? And then lastly, are you expecting the supplement to be a shortcut? Are you looking for it to just melt fat off of you? Because if that's the case, then I would, much like the GLP-1 activators, run far and fast away and save your money and put that into something else. And one bonus question for today's episode. So this was from Anonymous from Minnesota, and they had asked what supplements to add when taking a GLP-1. And I think there's a few that can be maybe really helpful. I had mentioned like whey protein, or I think protein shakes can be something, especially if you find that the medication really brings your appetite down. There is certainly no shame in bringing protein shakes into the picture. And I think honestly, they can kill two birds with one stone. You get protein in and you get fluids, because I do find that for some people, that medication again can tamp down your thirst signals. And sometimes I think headaches can arise from just not getting good hydration. With that, I will say that electrolytes can again be helpful. And then a multivitamin just ensures that you're getting some of those good micronutrients as well, especially if you have a reduced intake. I think that the medication is meant to help control your appetite, but I will say that the medication is not meant to starve you. So it's still important to get good, high quality nutrition in. And sometimes I see that that is not always the case, especially if you notice that you're experiencing nausea or just not feeling good. You might tend to lean a little bit more towards carbs versus proteins, which can sit a little bit heavier. So if you're taking something like a GLP-1, protein shakes can be really helpful. Electrolytes, make sure you look for something that's sugar-free. I personally love Cure Hydration, and they use really clean ingredients. As much as I don't love the word clean, they don't use any artificial sweeteners or artificial coloring. So I will link them below as well if you're interested in checking them out. And then I also will say the multivitamin. So protein shakes, electrolytes, multivitamin, those I would say are the three big supplements that can help if you're on a GLP-1. But again, I would say case by case, it can be optional in oftentimes a lot of cases. That wraps up today's AMA. So our very first episode. I will invite you to submit your questions. So if you like hearing from your peers, or if you have a question that you've been chewing on, I would invite you, don't be shy, submit it below. You'll see a box for your AMA question submissions, because I love to hear from you and I would love to do some of these, maybe monthly. It could be a question related to fitness. It could be a question related to blood sugar or CGM. There's really no question that's off limits. It could be about mindset and just how to find that motivation. So if you are thinking about a question, chances are somebody else is too. And I can't help you if I don't know what's going through that brain of yours. So again, don't be shy. Submit your questions below. Make sure to subscribe and follow so that way you get updates for future episodes. And I thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you on the next episode.